Please welcome our next speaker, Linn Zaw Win, a senior technical consultant. Today, Linn will be presenting PCF for beginners. Please stick around after Linn's session for a live Q&A.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining my session today. Today's session is about the PCF for beginners, and I'm really thank you for the community to voting for this session and making it happen. And this is the introductory section for the developers and the technical consultants who have never built a PCF control before. Oh, by the way, the QR code at the top right corner that you're seeing is not the COVID-19 check-in code. It is just the QR code to download this slide deck. So if you're going to take the screenshot and refer to the slide deck, this is probably the only slide that you need to take a screenshot or get the URL of it, and you can download this slide. Okay, for those who don't know me or who don't know how to pronounce my name is Linn Zaw Win, and my main focus is working on the Dynamics 365 CE projects as part of the implementation. And I work on the other Power Platform areas such as Power Automate Cloud Flows and Power Automate Power Apps, Canvas apps. I'm Microsoft Business Application MVP. I'm currently working as a senior technical consultant as a DXC technology. And before we start the session, I have a bit of a confession to make. Well, until last 3 months ago, I also had no clue about building the PCF controls, just like you all. It's been almost 2 years since Power Apps CLI. The tooling for creation of the PCF control was first available as a public preview, but I didn't have a chance to learn about it until that time. And I came from a developer background, and I had an impression that it was going to be too hard or too technical, and I needed to learn a lot. So I keep pushing it until I actually have to really implement for a project. And when Nick Dolman posted about this tweet for Dynamics Con submission, and I decided to take that as a challenge and for myself to start learning PCF control and share my learning journey with you all and prove that it is not really that hard as you think it is. Okay, first of all, why PCF? The understanding why is important because you need to make sure that you definitely need a PCF control. You always ask yourself a question like, am I solving a very specific problem? Or do I really need a PCF control, or can I just build using out-of-the-box control for this requirement? And Power's component framework is a way to modify the user interface in a supported way. It enhances the user interface and it optimizes the user experience. And it's also ability to writing the real code and creating the functionality that meets specific advanced needs and to solve those complex problems. So it can be developed by developers and easily reused by the makers. Since it's a component, it can be reused in all parts of the environment. It can be built and as a configurable control. Okay, so what are the advantages of using the PCF control when we used to have the HTML web results? The possibility to create the code components is for both model-driven app and Canvas app, and in future even Power Apps portals will be available to use the PCF controls. And unlike the HTML web results, the code components are rendered as part of the same context, creating a seamless experience for the users. And so it loads together with the same form. It's not just the iframe HTML web resource where the whole main form loaded and the iframe loads the HTML web resource separately. And the HTML resource are only limited to this box frame where it is embedded. So it's not ideal for some of the scenarios like showing the pop-up and stuff. And this PCF controls are bundled in all this HTML, CSS, style sheets, and TypeScript, all into a single solution package file. So it's easier moving across the environments, also for shipping through the app source. Okay, so as I mentioned just now, the PCF controls are now available for more driven apps, and it has been in the Canvas ad. It has been available as a private preview for a long time, and by this month, it will be general available by the March of 2021. And at the same time, it will also be available for public preview for Power Apps portal. So as a good news for portal building the portal using the PCF controls. So what are the technologies involved that you need to learn building the PCF control? The first thing is you must really learn how to write a TypeScript language. So because it's used a TypeScript instead of JavaScript, and the HTML's elements are added to the container programmatically instead of using the plain HTML. And other than TypeScript, it is not mandatory, but it's beneficial to know the Fluent UI, the previously known as the Office UI Fabric, and which is the React-based components framework for building experience for Microsoft 365, so that you can build the controls which blend in with other out-of-the-box controls. Okay, let's get started how to build the PCF controls. First of all, you'll need the environment. And the environment, if you don't have your own dev environment, you can sign up for a Power Apps community plan using your Office 365 email. And you'll get the developer instance environment for individual use, and there's no expiry date. It's our trial environment. You can play around as much as you like. But for any reason, if you don't have the Office 365, Microsoft 365 account, you can sign up for the Dynamics environment and the Dynamics trials. Okay, once you get the environments, you start downloading the tools required for it. So the first tool is required is the Node Package Manager, NPM, which comes with the Node.js. So this is the tool that you require to download all these required packages for this tooling. Once you get it, you can download the Power Apps CLI. So the installation instruction is there in the Microsoft Docs site, and once you have downloaded my slide, you can open up in this link and go to find how to install the Power Apps CLI. So this is the command line interface to initialize the PCF project, and push the deploying into the environments, and you can do all this stuff with this Power Apps CLI. And the last but not least, you'll need a code editor, which you can use any Visual Studio 2017, Visual Studio 2019, or you can use the Visual Studio Code for free, which is the free tool for code editor. In order to create for the very first time, you just create the initialize. You call this command in the Power Apps CLI tool, and this is the format is PCF init. Init means initialize. In the namespace, this is the namespace of your project, and the name of your your control, your code components. And the template is whether you're going to create a tool for a field or a data set, which is the subgrid table. So you can find out more details in this Microsoft Docs site. And the code components has three parts. Once you initialize, it creates all these code components in the back end. It will create the manifest file and all these component implementations required for this TypeScript files, all these user interface and functionalities, and all these resource files that you can include for CSS or images. So let me go through one by one. The manifest file is an important part where it is the metadata file in XML format that defines the component. So it contains the metadata of the control, such as the name of the control, the description, the preview image, and all the dispersions and field or data set. And the second part is the input and output properties. So if your controls has accept all input parameters, or the name of the TypeScript function that returns an object as the output parameter. So you need to define input output parameters in the manifest file. And after that, it also has the list of resources that the component needs. So the image and CSS style sheets, the list of resources, which I'll explain in the next slide. And the last part is the features. So if your app if your control requires special features for control, such as capturing audio, image, video, reading the barcodes, or inquiring, retrieving through the web API, so you can specify in that feature. Okay, so the next part is the component implementation. So this is where one of the key steps developing the code components using the PCF. So all the logic, everything is inside in the code component implementation. So each component implementation must start with the index of TS, which is a TypeScript file that includes the definition of the function. So this index.ts is auto-generated by PCF tooling with 4 main submethods. Okay, so the first one is the init, which is the require method. You need to implement it to use to initialize the component instance for the very first time. So components will kick off the remote server calls and other initialized calls. You have to define it in this init method. So the second method is the update view. So this method will be called when any value in the property is changed. So it includes a field value change or global values such as the width and height. All these values change offline status, or component metadata such as the field become the label change, or the field visibility or read-only change. All these changes will call this update view update view methods. And the third one is the get output. So this is called this is the optional method, one of the only optional methods in all 4, and it is called by the framework prior to the components receiving the new data. So in this method, you need to set any of the bound fields defined in the manifest file. And the last one is the destroy. So this method is invoked when the component is removed from the DOM tree. So this is for your chance to remove all the clean up all the release all the memory that the component is using. And the last one is just the resources, which you define in the manifest file, the CSS, the codes, the image, HTML, and other translation resix files. So once you're finished developing your control, you can start you can debug your code by using the npm start command. By using that command, it will just launch the browser window, and where you can see and you can play around and debug, how make sure if it is working. And to apply the control to the environment, your test environment that I mentioned in the very first slide, the one that you created. So you can use first authenticate with your account, and then you just push it and set the publisher prefix for your control. Okay, let's start the demo for this, and we'll start building the PCF control. I'll show you how simple it is. Okay, I am now going to create the control. I'll start the project under C folder. So I've created a new folder, and I'll just start a PowerShell window here. So I just press Shift and right click to open up the PowerShell window here. And as I mentioned in my slide, the very first one that I need to do is initialize this control. So in this example, we'll build the pigless filter control, which is one of the exercise in the D365 training PCF training course. So as you can see, it's finished for initializing the project. So you just be sure to run the npm install to install the project dependencies. So that will just download and include all the dependencies of the PCF control project. They can take a while, but it doesn't take a lot of time. So after that, what we will do is we will include the React templates as well, because we want to make this pigless control look as much similar as the out-of-the-box choice field. Okay, let's start to create the project, PCF project. I will start in the C temp folder. I created a folder called pigless filter. Let's start the PowerShell window here by clicking on the right click and shift and right click. That will open up the PowerShell window. And as I mentioned in the slide earlier, the first method, the first command to initialize is the PCF init. So once the project is initialized, you can run the second command to npm install. So what it will do is it will install all these required components for this PCF control. So in this example, we'll build the pigless filter control, which is one of the controls in the PCF course by D365 training. And as part of this control, we'll have to install the React framework as well. It is not necessary, it's not mandatory for all of the projects, but if you want to build a control that looks like your own or out-of-the-box Power Apps control, you can use the React framework to install and okay, it's almost done. Okay, now that we have installed the dependencies for this project, we'll install the React framework. This is not mandatory for all the projects, but it is if you are building the control with the React framework, you can install it. Once it's done, we'll use the code dots to open the VS Code in the same folder. And this is what your PCF control looks like. And for the first one that you have to do is to edit this is the main manifest file that I told you about just now. This is where you define the property of your control, the input and output properties. And for this example, I edit two properties. The one is the big list, the choice field that I want to filter, which is bound to the one of the controls. And another one is the filtering, just the text field, the text input, and it is not bound. It is just an input file. Once we have defined this property, it's a good idea to rerun, build this one so that it will generate the output or input properties based on this manifest. So let's open up the terminal, run the npm run build. Okay, once the file manifest TypeScript file has been automatically generated, we'll create the control. So the control file I'll create as the new file. I'll name it big list control .txx, which is the TypeScript file. And this is the drop-down control based on the React. We import this Office UI Fabric, which is the previous name of this framework. And what it does is just the on change of the drop-down. It just it just changed this based on the selected value. And this will render as this particular the HTML control. So after that, we'll go back to the index.ts, which is the main TypeScript file generated by the PCF tooling. And as I mentioned, there are 4 methods in it: and update view, get outputs, and disrise. They are all pre-generated. And we'll just import all these React DOMs that we're going to use for this one. So once we imported all these libraries, we'll declare the variables that we're going to use. And I have 3 functions, additional functions that I am going to use. So one of the things is onChange. Once onChange, it will set the value and call the notify output change. And this one is the rendering to this control. And this is where we do the filter part and only show the values included in the filter. And the last one is just a get raw value, which is getting the output of the value of this choice column field. So in its function, we'll add the control initialization code. So this is just to initialize and add to all these variables. In the update view, so the next one is the update view. We'll add the one. We'll only call this method when the update properties include this big list field name. So if its update view happens for any other changes like the size changes or offline, online changes, this is not going to re-render this control. And this get outputs will just replace with the value of the selected value. So once we change in this custom control, it will return this big list value. And the last one is the try. We'll just the whole container. We'll just mount this from the React DOM. Okay, once we're done, just save it. And then what we can start is in the console, we call npm start. That will load, that will compile and load your control in your test environment. So it will just open up the pop-up in a new browser window. And you can just test it, your control. But for this scenario, we're just building bound controls, so it's not the control. The bound control is not there, so you can't really test it. But if you're building a control that is playing around the UI and things, you can just test in this environment. Okay, so after that, you can terminate this one by pressing the Control C. It will ask you to terminate yes, no, and press the yes. And after that, in order to deploy, we first have to authenticate. So this is, we call the PAC again. And over here, we'll create an access to the URL. This is the environment that we're going to deploy. And once we're there, we just fill up the username and password. And once you sign in, it will be authenticated. After that, you just have to call the PCF push and the publisher prefix of your choice. Once you kick in, it will just build the solution, and it will just deploy it into your environment. So it will just automatically create a solution like this. So once you get in there, you will see the PCF control. So and then if you want to add into your form, open up the classic form explorer, because it's still not configuring the PCF control is still not available in the new font designer at the moment. And once you open it, you click on the control that you want to add. For this case, I want to add the filter choice. So I add the control, pick this filter, and I choose the show it in the both web, tablet, and the phone forms. So the first parameter is automatically bound to the field, so you don't have to worry about it. The second one is that you can be a static value, which options we're going to show. So in this case, we're going to show only these 3 options out of all the options available. Once you are done, click and save and publish. So once it's published, you can just refresh your screen. And here, this is the normal choice field on the form field. And you can see this all the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But in the filter one, it will only show the options for 1, 3, and 5. So that's the whole process for it. And so as I mentioned, just initializing the project, deploying the code, everything is pretty much simple. And the only tricky part is building and designing your control. Okay, let's go back to our presentation slide. Just now, what I show you is how we build the controls using the normal approach, how as documented in the Microsoft doc site. But there are other ways to initialize your projects and deploy your tool. So as Jonas Rep mentioned, if you're not working with the XRM toolbox, you're just working way too hard. So there are other easier ways to make your life easy. And instead of remembering all these commands, you can use these tools to build your tool faster. The first one is not from the XRM toolbox, but it's worth mentioning that because it's the human generated PCF generator by Ivan. It is to kickstart your PCF framework project. The benefit of this project is you don't have to remember each and all these commands. You can just fill it up whatever it prompts you. So first of all, you just call the PCF your space PCF space dash dash force. Then it will ask you one by one what do you want to give your namespace, what do you want to be the name of your control, and what is the field, and all these functions. So you don't have to remember each and every parameter. So it is really cool. And not only that, on top of just the normal PCF generating from the PCF tooling, it also edits the samples CSS files and the preview of the control and also the regex translation file. So it is easier for you to follow along, and it's more complete project than what it gives you with the PCF tooling. So another one is the PCF builder, which is exam toolbox tool created by Danish. So Danish also make if you are like someone like me who is not really good at the command line interface tools. So I want a GUI, I want to see in the UI, and I want to populate all these fields. And once you create, it will just run the same command in the back end, but you can just use with the interface instead of just running in the tools. Same thing, you can open up in the VS Code, build, test. You can build as a solution, and you can deploy everything you can do, but with the user interface. So the PCF builder is not only in the exam toolbox; it's also available in the Visual VS Code extension. So you can download it from the marketplace. So it helps you. It provides you the list of commands with the Ctrl+Shift+P, and you can just select from the command list, so you don't have to remember. And the next tool is not related to building your PCF control or initializing your PCF project, but this is more like after building your control, you create the tool and then you choose in your forms or your applications. Then you can use this tool to keep track where it is being used in your model-driven app forms. And where in this example, you can see it's not only showing your custom PCF control, it's also show the Microsoft custom controls as well. So it's really useful when Microsoft has deprecated one of the controls and you can identify where this control has been used. So you can go and replace or remove this control from your forms. And you can also specify where this control is being expected, so it can show you where is missing this expected usage. Okay, so until so far, if you have any questions with your building regarding my demo about building the PCF controls, or any question regarding what are the main components, or even these tools, you can feel free to drop a question in the chat window. And I'll try to answer as much as I can. And after that, we'll go at the end of the session. There will be also a live Q&A session there where you can also ask me more. Okay, so before I wrap up this session, I would like to share some useful resources which were really helpful in my learning journey of the PCF controls. So the first one is when I started taking the Microsoft exam, so I had to take that learning part where it's creating components with the PCF framework. And this is the learning part with 3 modules, and it's really good to have the basic understanding of the building PCF controls. But if you really want to go into the hands-on experience, you want to build, by the guided video tutorials, I totally recommend you to go for a 365 training where you have the bar app 0 to PCF. So that is where there's a training that boosted me from like 0 to PCF before I started preparing this session. Also, even in demo session, the control that I built, the user, is the one from this exercise. And once you are done with the basic parts, you're pretty confident to build more extensive and more complex scenarios. This is the session, the course that you should totally attend. It's a professional PCF for modern apps course by Scott Duro. So he has a really good examples, a lot of videos, and I can really assure that you can get your most out of it, for learning from this course. There are also a few blog and articles that I can recommend. I want to recommend. So one is the technique article, where community or just uh, write together in this technique wiki article for getting started with the PCF. And also there's ones in the link in the bar wiki site where they have compiled all the useful links for the PCF related stuff. And there are a couple of blog series. One of them is from The Budget, where it's a complete hands-on guide starting with the PCF. It's a series of blogs, so not just a post, so you can just follow along and build. And another one is from Alan, and he posted a series of blog about getting started with the PCF framework. And if you want more and more, you can have, there's a Microsoft has listed the community resources in this link below, and you can see the videos, blog, and all these tools available related to the PCF control building. So it's a really good article, and this page, you should check it out. And before you start building, I recommend you to just look at the other sample controls. So Microsoft has a bunch of dozens of sample controls with the source code. So you can go to this URL and view what Microsoft controls look like. And if the control that you want to build is quite similar to one of these controls, what you can do is you can just modify and you can do reference this code and build on top of this. It is easier, at least for me, it's easier than just starting from the scratch. So not just Microsoft controls, there are like community controls from the PCF gallery. There are like hundreds of free controls available for open source by the community. So you can refer to these controls and you can learn from these. So in this site, PCF gallery is hosted by Guido, and you can just go and find the similar tool that you want to build, click download and go to the GitHub source, get their open source control, and you learn, reference, and get inspiration. And if you're stuck with building your controls, you go to this community forum in the bar user site for bar apps, pro dev, and ISV subforum. So where you can get more help with your issues. And if you want to keep up to date with the latest news and all these inspiration from these awesome people, these are the Twitter handles for the people that I recommend to follow regarding with the PCF. And for Hammond, he doesn't have Twitter, or maybe I couldn't find, so I just provide the link for the LinkedIn URL. So you can follow those people. They usually post, if anything new related to the PCF release, they just tweet about it and try and show some examples to the users. Okay, that's all for my session. I'm really thank you all for attending my session today. If you, I also usually blog my blog posts at the linnzawwin.blogspot.com. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can follow me in this Twitter handle. And if you have more questions about all these, any related to this session, you can ask me in the live Q&A session, which is coming soon.
Hey, Linn.
Hi, Rami.
Looks like
Thanks
there's
for
a few
coming in the
questions
session
already.
as the moderator.
That's all right, no worries. Yeah, so there's a few questions already in the live stream if you want to start tackling those, but it's some of them are based on your sort of presentation, and they're wondering whether your code is available for download. I think I saw a slide for that.
Yes, it is actually the whole project. The whole simple code is part of the course that I mentioned in the presentation. So it's a PCF Zero to Hero course by David Yak. So I totally recommend to go. I leave the link in the chat window, so you can join the session.
Perfect.
And yeah, they can attend it.
Sounds good. And there's a general question about sort of what are the existing PCF controls that have been done by the community that you like, and are there any that you want to see that come up in the future?
The one that I really like is the end-to-end checkboxes by Tengi. So that is we have the many-to-many subgrids, and that control render that as the checkbox, like multi-select checkbox. So you can just select and save it, and it automatically disassociate at the back end. Another control that I really like is from Benedict. That is the conversational control that renders the activities. For example, we have this SMS activity, and that controls render like how we can see in the phone SMS, the incoming and the outgoing,
A preview.
like bidirectional. Yeah, it's a really cool like visual representation to change the whole way of how you see the things. And the latest one that I saw just a few days ago from Dana is two option composite fill. So what it does is they have the boxes of two options fields. The most useful use case scenario is when you have this allow email, allow bulk email, allow phone, all these multiple yes no columns in the contact. So we render them and show them in the one big multiple buttons, and it shows disable when you make changes.
Sounds good. Yeah, there's heaps of them in the PCF gallery, and yeah, I've created a few. There's a few that I still need to publish in there, but the way I see them is that they're usually a starting point, so they give you an idea about how to do something, and then you can pick it up and then go and enhance it to meet your requirements. So yeah, it's don't always start from scratch. Sometimes you do get sort of a starter kit if you want that you can pick up and run with. But sort of associated with that question is that, are there any sort of new controls that you would like to see in the future?
Yeah, what I would like to see in the future is more around the dataset controls. In the PCF control itself, like when I go through, like there are a lot of awesome controls, but most of them are like the bound field controls, and we probably need a lot of more table controls to have like recently one of my colleagues, and he is looking for something similar to build something like editable grids kind of thing, but he only need some sort of sample, but he couldn't find a lot of samples. So yeah, I would like to see more datasets controls there.
I completely agree with you, Lynn. That's one of the things that I would like to see as well, is maybe a starter kit for an editable grid that people can take, like even if Microsoft open sources the editable grid that is currently available, and then we can build on top of that to meet specific requirements. That's absolutely true. There's a question on whether you know whether PCF controls for lookups are going to come out soon. I know through the sort of MVP program, they've been talking about it for a while, but I've never seen anything concrete yet.
Yeah, me neither. And we're still in the dark about when it comes to when it's going. It's not even like available for a private preview, so I'm not sure about
Yep.
when it's going to be available. Yeah.
And are there ways of? I know you can build PCF controls bound to a specific attribute, but without actually using the attribute. So a standalone PCF control, like for example, a text or something that is formatted or something that connects to something else. Is there any visibility over building those standalone PCF controls without linking them to a record or an attribute if it's not required?
Oh, currently we just still like at least link to one of the controls, but it doesn't necessarily mean to be the controls that we are using.
Yeah.
So normally we just link it, bind it to the name control text box field, and then just bind it just to place the control to part of the form,
Yeah.
and the rest is the control itself is using.
Okay, sounds good. So just one question that I have that is related to one of the other questions, sort of in the list in here. If you have a sort of, how do you test dataset type components with data that is in sort of in the local test harness? How do you do that?
Yes. Yeah. For dataset, it's a little bit different from normal field type components. For a normal field type component, we have all these field properties on the right hand side of the test harness to populate and change around and test. But for a dataset, there's a browse the file upload button, so you can upload the CSV file. So you can prepare your CSV file or export from advanced file and convert it to CSV. And then once you upload it, you can, if your control has all these properties defined in the control manifest file, you can bind each of the columns from the CSV to these properties. Or if there's no property defined, it will just load all the data in the subgrid. So yeah, it's just that's with uploading the CSV file.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. And sort of related to that, there's Philip that is asking about sort of DevOpsing all of that, putting it into a DevOps pipeline. So how do you store your source code? And also, what is the best strategy in terms of deploying those controls across environments?
Just like other Dynamics components, no code components like plugins and stuff. So you just build and you just store check in the source code and upload the control as upload the PCF control. And for DevOps, it just going through add into the solution, and it'll be part of this solution component and deploy across the other environments.
Absolutely. So with Azure DevOps specifically, I know there are lots of supporting add-ons like the Power Platform build tools and so on that can do manipulation of source code and so on. For the command line, like building your controls and all of that, obviously that can be done in Azure DevOps. And yeah, I completely agree with you that once it is packaged within a solution, then moving it across environments is really straightforward. So hopefully that answers Philip's question, but if not, Philip can sort of add some more comments in there. Let's have a look. I think there was another question in there. Actually, one of my questions is, there are lots of controls out there for address finders. But what if you want to build one specific for your country or your specific address finder capabilities for your customers, for example? What is the best way to approach that?
Oh, yeah. Just like you mentioned, when we go through the PCF gallery, it's just don't reinvent the wheel. Just I think if there's something similar control available in the PCF gallery, you can this is open source, and you can just download the source, clone it, and you just go through and you can just modify the code where you need to change to the part. So it is not like totally just starting from the scratch, and just referring to some of the existing code is probably the best, easier way.
Yeah, sounds good. So Chris is asking whether learning React is necessary for developing PCF controls.
Well, it's not like you can still build without React, but I think it is a good way, like easier way how to make your your control like look better, and using the React control framework, it is easier way to manage the DOM, and I think it is not mandatory necessary, but I think it's best to know to learn the React framework if we're starting with the PCF control.
So the second part of the question is, will not using React limit the complexity of controls?
That is hard. I've just tested the Microsoft sample controls without React, but other than that, I have never built a control without a React. So I cannot like personally say my experience about it, but I think it is later it's all up to the preference of each developer, whether they prefer to use the React control or not. For me, I think it is easier if I've take some time to get into the React, learn it, and then use it, which is taking less time in the future of building all these controls. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I think when I looked at PCF controls, my answer was it depends. If you're building something really simple, like just an HTML tag, don't bother with React. But if you're building something that has a rich user interface, a data set or something like that, then obviously using React will sort of simplify the complexity of your control. Sort of along those lines, as you're building them, do you see any potential security vulnerability by building a control that may not follow best practices?
Security vulnerable. Well, all these controls are like the client side, right? So what that means is whatever you're able to do through the client side, it is bound to your security authorization and authentication. And so whatever you can do with your own account is even if you cannot do with these controls, you can still do it other browser extension like Level Up, or you can do it with the JavaScript, the client code. So I don't think there's a security issue with that. Only when you're just like accessing your own APIs and applications with the hard coded, maybe like the token and stuff. That might be the only security risk that I can see. How do you think, Rami?
I know that the rich text editor that was provided had a security vulnerability, mainly around cross-site scripting. So people managed to inject sort of HTML code that then got executed on the client side and then started executing code on that space. So there is ways of sort of dealing with that. I remember for one of the clients, they wanted just a plain, non-editable, rich text renderer. So what we ended up doing is we actually created an HTML control that basically renders HTML that feeds from another source, basically an attribute, but then it strips anything that is JavaScript, anything that could be vulnerable, anything that might execute code that we want to, because all we wanted is just a display. So yeah, there is a possibility to exploit it, and it is up to sort of the developer to ensure that those situations are handled. But as you mentioned, like within the sort of Dynamics or Power Platform instance that you're running, it's as far as your user can go in terms of security roles and so on. That's correct. Anything else you want to add, Linn? I think we've got a couple of minutes, and then we'll just give people the chance to ask a couple of questions if they've got some last-minute questions.
Yeah, for me, it is like a real journey, to start the PCF controls. Before I actually start learning about it, like 4 months ago, and it was a really daunting. I came from a developer background, but when it comes to like start available as a PCF, I know what's going on. I just read the news and follow the blogs and how people are doing. But I didn't really get into it. And part of it is because there was no requirement for me to build a control in the project itself. So I wasn't forced to learn. and this is my opportunity to get me forced to learn it. So my advice to the audience is like, yeah, don't be afraid of it. It is fun. Like once you start getting into it, and once you get into the developing, once you finish your first control, simple one, and you'll be more comfortable, you're happy to build more and more controls.
Sounds great. And yeah, you're completely right. It is lots of fun to actually play around with. And it's amazing what the community is coming up with. And you're thinking, oh, that's a good control. I wonder why Microsoft didn't think about it. Yeah, so I think that's all the questions that we've got so far.
Okay. Then let's wrap up the session. And okay, thank you all for attending the session. Bye.
Thank you, Linn. Bye.